Witches and magic have fascinated people throughout history. Is it really possible for people to take advantage of these mystical arts and manifest tangible enchantments on unsuspecting people? Why are people so fascinated with the Salem witch trials? And does it connect to anything deeper? After this episode, there should be no more questions about what really happened in the Salem witch trials, and whether or not there really are things that go bump in the night, aside from Rob falling out of bed. All this and more on today's edition of The Edge of Wonder. Wonder.
Welcome to The Edge of Wonder. We're your hosts. I'm Rob.
And I'm Ben.
This all came to us while we were researching bloodlines of the Illuminati and the Committee of 300. If Satan worshipping and bad uses of witchcraft are real, what in the world actually happened during the Salem witch trials?
In 1692, 14 women and 6 men were executed for practicing witchcraft. Over 150 people were accused. It went down as the most ridiculous example of hysteria in American history, or was it?
Historians and amateur researchers alike have been confused about this purported hysteria for years. Some of them researched the Puritan religious aspects, some of them researched the political climate, and the wars going on with the American Indians at the time.
And some claim that it must be the agriculture and a hallucinogenic fungus on the rye crops called ergot that caused all of this. If you look into the after effects of ergot, or grain green, and the amount it would take to actually cause this, not to mention the fact that it would get cooked out when baking any bread, it's easily debunkable. So then, what was it?
None of them could ever dream that the very thing they should research was even a remote possibility, that witchcraft or magic could be real. And therein lies the crux of the matter with the Salem witch trials. And as much as we hate to say it, all of those researchers were wrong.
Recently, we've been doing a lot of episodes about the deep state, and what we found is chilling. Not only have we all been deceived by this, but what we found out affects everyone on both sides of the argument.
Now, before we go on, we just wanted to say that in no way do Ben and I think that executing people, like happened in the Salem witch trials, is good. And we also think there were some things that happened that are rather ridiculous in these trials. Absolutely, without a doubt, ridiculous. But it's what was going on behind the scenes that was scariest.
We've shown in previous videos that when people have good intentions and when people have compassionate thoughts, it can have an extremely positive effect, not only on people around us, but also objects we interact with.
So if you identify as a witch, but you're a good person, and your intentions are just to send good thoughts and love towards living things, this video and the things we've found have really nothing to do with you. If you're a good person, you're a good person, and Ben and I support you. What we're about to say is not about witches or non-witches, it's about certain bad people connected to the Illuminati.
Another thing, anyone in any profession or apart from any organization claiming to be good can still be bad. An example of this would be like a Catholic priest who has done something to affect someone, and then the things he did were crimes, then of course he would be held accountable for those crimes. I mean, this is not about the religion, it's about these people who are in this religion.
Yeah, I mean, there could be people who call themselves witches, and maybe a lot of you are good, but if someone who calls himself a witch does something actually bad, and we mean really bad, then of course that person, not all witches, should be held accountable.
You follow our reasoning here, right? Okay, good. Now, we're gonna get into what is really happening. Firstly, there's been a lot of controversy revolved around a minister and an author of the time named Cotton Mather.
Cotton Mather was probably the biggest name that's been thrown under the bus all these years. He wrote several books on the subject of witches around the time of the trials, with one of them called Wonders of the Invisible World, outlining exactly what happened during these trials.
We watched documentary after documentary and read article after article shaming and cursing Cotton Mather. But was he a discriminatory bigot out to persecute innocent people? Or was he rational and trying to figure things out just like everyone else? Let us tell you what we found and you can decide for yourselves.
Like we said, most of the videos we watch paint him out to be some kind of ludicrous Puritan. All a Puritan is someone who wasn't cool with the Catholic Church running things the way that they were, and they were more interested in actually following the teachings of Christ rather than following the Catholic Church blindly. So these people were already under scrutiny for that.
Back to Cotton. His father, Increase Mather, was a minister and involved administration at Harvard College. He pushed his son Cotton academically quite a bit.
So much so that young Cotton Mather entered Harvard when he was 10 years old, becoming one of the most brilliant students in the history of the university. Cotton graduates when he's 15 or 16, and he goes on to write over 300 books, both short and long, over the course of his life.
Cotton became a minister. Most people think that because he was a minister and a leader of the Puritan movement, and especially with his involvement of the Salem witch trials, that he'd be anti-science. But it couldn't be further from the truth.
Between 1713 and 1719, Cotton became a Fellow of the Royal Society of London, the leading scientific organization in the world. So this guy has a microscope where he's studying amoebas while other scientists of their time had their fingers up their nose.
Also, in the early 1700s, a bad spell of smallpox breaks out in Massachusetts, particularly Boston. Cotton, seeing this, starts to advocate vaccines for people. That is, injecting people with a bit of the disease so that the body can fight it and ward off a more serious case of the disease. Doctors at the time couldn't accept what Cotton Mather was advocating.
It got so bad that someone even threw a bomb into Cotton Mather's home to kill him. Now, regardless of whether you believe in vaccinations or not, does this sound like some hard-nosed religious nutcase? 900 people died in Boston because they couldn't believe what Cotton was trying to tell them, and instead they all cursed him and made fun of him.
One writer even wrote a book defaming Cotton and recounted incidences that Cotton then tried to sue for defamation. We weren't there to know what happened, but it really comes down to whether you believe Cotton Mather's was legit or not, and by the end of this video, you'll probably think he was.
We read all of Cotton Mather's Wonders of the Invisible World. Once you get through much of the religious references and biblical reasoning for many things, which we're sure most people could not get through, we were shocked to find how rational and reasonable Cotton Mather was, considering the very confusing circumstances of people being accused of witchcraft.
The biggest difference, it seems, between Cotton and other people, especially nowadays, is that he considered witchcraft to be a legitimate possibility, but that people needed to be very careful in how they evidenced the convictions. In fact, he warned against false convictions multiple times and even grieved for families of those executed.
In his book, he recounts several unexplained stories, and we have to say, they read like an extremely properly written episode of Edge of Wonder. So we highly encourage you to read his stories of these cases.
One of the stories recounted that had nothing to do with the trials was about an accomplished man from Boston named Joseph Beacon, who saw an apparition of his brother, who was then located in London, visit him on the night of his death with a napkin tied around his head with a bloody wound appearing beneath it.
The apparition of his brother then told him how he was murdered, who the murderer was, and what to do to catch the killer.
Mr. Beacon's brother later found out through normal ways of communication between London and Boston that his brother indeed died the very night that he was visited, and the name of the man, down to how it happened, all checked out. I mean, yeah.
Okay, so, cool story, but before we go further, it needs to be mentioned here that the idea of an oath taken before giving testimony meant way more back then to these Puritans than we can really fathom. There was much more fear of lying under oath than there is now because they really believed there would be biblical repercussions. So while we give you these accounts, let's not forget to take this into consideration.
In Wonders of the Invisible World, there were 5 accounts from the court papers that Mather pulled from to explain to the government of the time what had taken place and why these people were convicted.
We can't mention all of them here, but we'd like to give you a good example of how all this played out. The first case Mather covered was of Rose Callender and Amy Dunny, and there was some weird stuff that reportedly happened during this trial, and even weirder testimony.
They were both indicted for bewitching 7 people. During these entire proceedings, witnesses would fall into strange and violent fits, especially when it came to making testimony or the part of the trial to indict the accused witches. This made it hard for the proceedings to move forward.
The witnesses reported that Amy Dunny, who was looking after the family's child, William Durant, breastfed the child. Yeah, weird. And she was an elderly woman. This was much to Anne Durant, William's mother's displeasure, and when she said so, Amy Dunny, the accused witch, went away with discontents and menaces.
If that wasn't weird enough, the night after, little William started having strange fits that went on for many weeks. I mean, what parent wouldn't start getting freaked out about this?
Seriously. What's almost equally weird is that a physician named Dr. Jacob gave them fascinating advice. He asked them to hang up the child's blanket in the chimney corner all day and all night, and if she found anything weird in it when she was going to wrap the child in it, to throw it right away into the fire.
So that night, a huge toad fell out of the blanket. A boy caught it and held it in the fire with tongs, according to the doctor's advice. The toad then made a terrible noise and then exploded with a flash of gunpowder. Basically, immediately after the toad was burned in the fire, the little boy recovered.
I mean, this was the testimony in the trial case. I mean, honestly, I'm not sure if I'm more surprised that the doctor knew to do this or by the story of the toad and the boy actually recovering from this.
But get this, guys, the next day, the accused witch, Amy Dunny's niece, told Anne Durant that her aunt was grievously scorched from fire. Anne Durant went to Amy's and found her in a burned state. The accused witch, Amy Dunny, then told Anne Durant she should live to see some of her children dead and herself upon crutches.
One day, not long after this, Anne Durant found Amy Dunny in her home and thrusted her out. Dunny said to her on the way out that her child wouldn't live much longer, and within 3 days, her child died. And soon after, she was taken with lameness in both of her legs.
But, like, what? It's so weird. But really, guys, it's up to you whether you believe this, but keep watching and we'll show you why we do. Later in the case, there were testimonies of at least 3 other people against Amy Dunny and Rose Cullender who had similar experiences of coughing up crooked pins and nails.
There was a search done on Rose Cullender's body where they found numerous teats where milky white substances flowed out. I guess this is where the term cold as a witch's teat in New England came from.
That's pretty gross.
It sure is.
All right, there were other testimonies too. A man named Robert Sheringham also testified that while he was carrying out his daily work and while passing Rose Cullender's house, the axle of his cart broke a part of Rose's home.
She apparently came out, threatened him that his horses would suffer for the wrong done to her home, and then shortly after, all 4 of his horses died, followed by his cattle, and then a bunch of other extremely unfortunate things happened to the poor guy.
And guys, we didn't even tell you everything that happened in the trial.
So the next person we'll discuss briefly is someone Cotton refers to as GB. So we're assuming he means George Burroughs, because that was the only guy with that, with those initials. He was so sure of his guilt and the testimony against him that he wouldn't even say his name.
George Burroughs was the only minister that was tried and executed for witchcraft. It's easier just to quote Cotton here, so this is what he said.
Quote, he was accused by 5 or 6 of the bewitched as the author of their miseries. He was accused by 8 of the confessing witches as being a head actor at some of their hellish rendezvous, and one who had the promise of being a king in Satan's kingdom, now going to be erected. He was accused by 9 persons for extraordinary lifting and such feats of strength as could not be done without a diabolical assistance. And for other such things he was accused until about 30 testimonies were brought in against him.
In our Bloodlines of the Deep State episode, we retold an account of a sacrifice where the blood of the sacrificed victims were used to sign the names of the children they were sacrificed for into a book.
Curiously, in this trial, multiple testimonies were given by people saying that Burroughs would approach them, saying he was a, quote, conjurer above the ordinary rank of witches, unquote, and would offer a book imploring them to sign. If the person would refuse, he would inflict cruel pains on them.
Another curious part about the testimonies is that several persons who themselves confessed to being witches also testified that GB had been at witch meetings and originally ensnared them into becoming a witch.
Okay guys, we just gave you a couple of examples of these trials. To our surprise, the court papers outline much of these testimonies, and while we're sure some of this was a special kind of hysteria, the question remains, who cooked it up and why?
While many historians and academics look into the surface to find answers, Rob and I realized that if this was real, it would all be about the bloodlines and there would be a special reason behind it.
Do you remember our Bloodlines of the Deep State episode where we mentioned some things about witchcraft? Most of the important names of the Deep State are names like Astor, Rothschild, and Rockefeller.
Quote, the Collins family has been kept out of the limelight because they have more occult power than the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers. So you might be asking, so what does this all have to do with Salem?
Fritz goes on to say, quote, for instance, I have a complete list of all people accused of witchcraft in New England in the 17th century, which includes some Collins. The 17th century was the first century that British settlers, mostly Puritans, some of whom are also known as Pilgrims and Congregationalists, settled in New England. In 1640, in Aquaday, Mass, a Collins was accused of witchcraft. In 1653, James Collins was accused of witchcraft in Lynn, Mass, and a Collins family lived in the Salem, Mass area of Marblehead during the 1650s when the witch trials occurred. They were neighbors to the family accused of witchcraft, unquote.
What we found is that the Salem witch trials are the story of the Collins family bloodline. And Salem was purposely orchestrated.
Wait, there's more. Quote, interestingly, some of the last names of other people accused of witchcraft in early colonial Massachusetts include Young, Bailey, Carrington, Godfrey, Hall, Brown, and Clinton. You will find all of these last names on people today who are connected to the satanic hierarchy, Illuminati, and Satanism. However, the worst example of dealing with witchcraft, the Salem witch trials, was instigated by the Collins family, unquote.
Pretty intense. Fritz explained that in his opinion, this was to destroy Christians and have them held accountable for what the Collins family did. But is that all? Could there be, alongside, an even more nefarious reason?
Does everyone love the story Lord of the Rings? We do. Sauron was evil, but if you compare him to today, he's not very smart. Why? Because today, if you mention to anyone you saw someone doing some Gandalf junk, they'd say you were crazy. If you said there was magic or people practicing magic or wizards, they say you were on LSD or ergot, or worse, you might be put into an institute.
Don't believe it? What's most people's reaction if someone says they've been through a satanic ritual abuse? It's beyond extremely hard for them to accept.
But that is very much the case in today's world. Not only are certain bad people practicing these things and performing ritual magic, but they're simultaneously telling you it's preposterous and training you to reject it or anyone who points to it.
So what's more evil, Sauron for using it and pointing it straight at his enemies? Or would these people today be worse for using it over a long period of time, training us to not see it, reject it, and even think it's preposterous?
This, in fact, was the result of the Salem witch trials, to allow the Illuminati to hide in the shadows and do the most abysmal things because, hey, we all think that stuff is ridiculous, right?
But what do you guys think? Now that we know some of these witchcraft stories, not all of them, have some proof, would you like to see an episode dealing with some crazy cases of witchcraft over history?
Furthermore, if witchcraft exists, how much truth is there to things like werewolves and vampires? Do you guys want to know how crazy it actually is out there? Comment below and let us know if you want episodes on this. Okay, so one of the weird things Ben and I came across was a new trailer for Sabrina the Witch on Netflix. And oh man, it was like pointing directly to some of these things.
Oh my gosh. I mean, okay, did you have like Sabrina Witch in the 90s, which is like cutesy, like, you know, mischief type stuff? What the heck is she like worshiping Baphomet?
Yeah.
Like, and there's like a thing where they're seated around a table and Baphomet's like at the center.
Well, and it's behind her all the time and stuff like that. Like, again, if you believe this stuff is real or not, that's up to you. But whoever created these shows,
They know what they're doing.
They know exactly what's going on. They either did their research or they're trying to point to something else.
Well, and the other thing, like, I think somewhere in the trailer they say, do you want to go for like the night or the light or something? Like you have to choose, and of course she has to choose the night, which is like the darkness.
Right, which is exactly up the alley of these like Satanists. Right?
And again, I mean, like we said in the very beginning, we're not saying witchcraft is evil. It's like when you start bringing in ritual sacrifice, I mean, that's like straight up
it's
evil.
like, what is evil, what is not? I mean,
And if you're like a witch trying to help people doing good things, it's like,
that's your business.
that has nothing to do with what we're talking
At
about
all.
here. You know, it's like worshiping these weird things.
And then trying to create some result through it, right? They're actually cursing things and doing things, and then, I mean, if you hurt anyone with anything you're doing, you're bad. That's all there is to it.
I mean, this really has like even ritual sacrifice. Like she's laying down there. It looks like they're gonna
there's
kill
like blood
something.
signing and books and
it's just exactly what we're talking about in the show. And I mean, we won't really get too much into this, but there's like a new person that's in charge of Netflix and are on the board, and it just brings in a whole series of questions.
Yeah, it does.
What is going on here? Why?
Anyway, guys, we'll be watching Sabrina the Witch with you.
We will, for sure. We'll probably maybe do a video on our reaction and all this crazy symbolism in there. Oh, and it even brought in Saturn. I saw.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, weird stuff.
All right, anyway, guys, we hope you liked this episode of Edge of Wonder, and until next time,
We'll see you guys out.
on the edge.
Not of witchcraft.